Hello, good morning, and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. These are the topics that we shall be discussing today, beginning with an important editorial in today's daily edition of the Hindu newspaper, a backsliding. Let's understand this editorial in great detail. There's a law, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. This law was enacted for the first time in 1976 when emergency was imposed in this country. Srimati Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister. What was the motivation to enact this law? Foreign hand. Prime Minister Srimati Indira Gandhi believed and felt that there are foreign forces which are trying to destabilize this country. There are foreign countries, foreign NGOs which are pushing money into India, providing monetary support to some NGOs in India, some institutions in India, and they are hell-bent on destabilizing this country. That is the reason this Foreign Contribution Regulation Act was enacted in the year 1976, and the purpose was to regulate foreign contribution into India. The purpose was to prohibit some individuals, some institutions from receiving foreign contribution of any kind and sort. This law was repealed because this law suffered from various disabilities, and we don't have to go too deep into that. This law was repealed in the year 2010, and a new law was enacted. Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010. Significant amendments were made to this law in the year 2020. Now, what is the combined effect of 2020 and 2021 amendments? Let's look at this in great detail. There are some individuals, institutions, which are prohibited from receiving foreign contribution. For example, candidates contesting elections, editors, publishers of newspapers, including the cartoonists, judges. And now in 2020, the term public servant was also included, which means public servants also are ineligible, are prohibited from receiving foreign contribution. The question on your mind, sir, what about political parties? If candidates contesting elections, editors, publishers, and cartoonists of the newspapers, judges, if they are prohibited from receiving foreign contribution, what about political parties? Are they allowed? Political parties also are not allowed. But then something else happened. What happened? Two major national political parties, the BJP and the Congress, they received foreign contribution. That means they received political donation from some foreign companies as well. Matter went to the Delhi High Court. Delhi High Court asked the Election Commission of India to look into it and take action against these two principal political parties. Both the political parties got together, changed the law, passed a finance bill in the parliament, and basically allowed that subsidiaries, Indian subsidiaries of foreign companies, they can donate money to political parties. That means although foreign companies cannot donate money to political parties, but if there are foreign companies and they have subsidiaries in India, these Indian subsidiaries of foreign companies can donate money to political parties in India. That is not it. This law was given a retrospective effect. This law, when it was changed in 2017, it was given retrospective effect, saying this law will be applicable from 1976. That means from 1976 onwards till 2017, if the Indian subsidiary of a foreign company has donated money to political parties, it is not a crime. But long story short, these are the individuals who are prohibited from receiving foreign contribution. And in 2020, another term was added, public servants, those who are paid money by the government, those who are remunerated for their work by the government. They are public servants. They also cannot receive foreign contribution. We will have to look at what happens in 2010 and what happens because of 2020 amendments. In 2020, significant changes, as I said, were made to this law. Prior to 2020, if there is an entity A and then there is an entity B, how can an entity receive foreign contribution? Whether you are eligible to receive foreign contribution or not. For that, what this entity has to do, it has to ask for a certificate. That is what we call FCRA certificate. And anybody, any entity which has an FCRA certificate is eligible to receive foreign contribution. Now let's suppose both A as well as B, they have FCRA certificate, which means both are eligible to receive foreign contribution. But in this case, A is receiving foreign contribution. Prior to 2020, the contribution received by A could have been donated to B by this entity A. But this donation has now been stopped under 2020 amendment, which basically means prior to 2020, if there are two entities which are eligible to receive foreign contribution, one entity is receiving foreign contribution. A part of this contribution, this entity could have donated to another entity. But now that has been stopped because of 2020 amendment. This cannot happen. Not just this. 50% could have been spent for administrative purposes. For example, there is an NGO which is tasked for providing education to weaker, marginalized sections of the society. That is the objective of this NGO. For this objective, it is receiving foreign contribution from the foreign countries or from foreign organizations. For example, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, so on and so forth. So many international entities are donating to this NGO. This NGO could have spent 50% of its donation for administrative purposes. For example, for paying salaries, for paying rents, for traveling purposes. 50% this entity could have spent on administrative purposes, 50% for other purposes, the real purpose, which is to provide education, for example. 2020 amendment said, no, this limit has to be 20%. That means from now onwards, an entity which is receiving foreign contribution, it can spend only up to 20% for administrative purposes. Prior to 2020, in which account can this entity receive foreign contribution? Because to receive foreign contribution, you have to open a bank account. This entity had the power to decide in which bank account, of which city, of which bank will I be able to receive this foreign contribution. That means the entity had the choice. It is your own choice. You decide which bank, which branch of this bank you want to receive your foreign contribution. 2020 amendment said no. The bank and the branch, the central government will specify, and only in that branch you will be able to receive foreign contribution. And now the branch is, bank is State Bank of India, Parliament Street branch. All the entities which want to receive foreign contribution, they have to apply for the FCRA certificate. Once they get this FCRA certificate, they have to open the bank account in the State Bank of India, the Parliament Street branch, and this entity can receive foreign contribution only in this bank account, not the bank account specified by this political entity, by this NGO. That's not it. Prior to 2020, this FCRA certificate could have been cancelled. Could have been cancelled or could have been suspended. Suspended for 180 days. Prior to 2020, this FCRA certificate could have been suspended by the central government for 180 days. Only 180 days. 2020 amendment said, now for additional 180 days. That means suspension first for 180 days, then additionally for 180 more days as well. That's the suspension. Further, let's say this FCRA certificate is valid for 5 years. That means for 5 years you can receive foreign contribution. Is there a provision for the renewal of this FCRA certificate? Yes, there is. Now 2020 amendment says you have to renew it within 6 months of expiration. If the FCRA certificate is valid for 5 years, within 6 months of its expiration, you have to ask the central government to renew the certificate. But that's not it. The central government may conduct an inquiry. When you are asking for the renewal of your FCRA certificate, within 6 months of the expiration of the certificate, the central government may institute an inquiry. Inquiry into 3 things. Inquiry number 1. Is this entity fictional or Benami? If it is Benami, we will not renew the FCRA certificate. If you have diverted funds or if you have misutilized funds, we will not renew your certificate. But more importantly, if this entity has been convicted for religious conversion or communal tension, then this FCRA certificate will not be renewed. All these significant changes were made in 2020. Now there is an entity known as Center for Policy and Research. This is one of India's premier think tank. This Center for Policy and Research was set up in the year 1973 and it conducts researches, policy interventions and programs which basically deepen policy interventions in India. Previously, it was headed by Pratap Banu Mehta, who writes frequently in the Indian Express. Right now, it is headed by Yamini Iyer, who also happens to be the daughter of a politician, Mani Shankar Iyer. But the point is, this entity, Center for Policy and Research, which was founded in 1973, it would raise 70% of its funds, 75% of its funds from outside India. But last year, its FCRA certificate was suspended for 180 days. Then suspended for another 180-day period. And now this time, what the central government has done? Central government has cancelled the FCRA certificate issued to Center for Policy and Research, which basically means if this entity was raising 75% of its money, funds from outside India, now it won't be able to raise this money and ultimately may lead to the death of this entity. But what are the specific allegations against Center for Policy and Research? 3 allegations. 1, it is spending this money, this foreign contribution, for purposes other than for which it was registered for. It was registered for providing policy interventions, conducting researches, but it is spending this money for something else. And what is that something else? I'll tell you slightly later. Second, it is transferring foreign contributions to other entities, which I told you is not allowed now. And third, it is publishing news articles in violation of FCRA. What is this news article violation of the FCRA? The law states any entity which gets FCRA certificate because of which it can receive foreign contribution, this entity cannot run current affairs programs. That's a complete no-no. You cannot run current affairs programs. It basically means you're running a sort of a news channel or a print media for that matter. That is something which is not allowed. And what the central government is saying, that this Center for Policy and Research is publishing news articles, basically current affairs programs, which is violation of FCRA, and that is why we are cancelling your FCRA certificate. Although Center for Policy and Research has denied all these allegations, saying how can we publish news programs? We are only publishing reports. Who are we? Center for Policy and Research. What do? We conduct research. We suggest policies to the government of India. We conduct research such as how is India adapting to heat waves, an assessment of heat action plans with insights for transformative climate action. The government is saying, since you have published this report, it basically means you are publishing news articles, basically running current affairs programs. We are publishing reports such as smart cities, promoting urban governance in India. We are conducting analysis of Pradhan Mantri Poshan Shakti Nirman, and you are saying we are publishing current affairs programs. We are not doing that. We are only publishing reports, which is our mandate, which is our job. June 2023, there was a newspaper report in Washington Post. I told you that I will tell you something slightly later. Allegation against Center for Policy and Research is that it is using this foreign contribution for purposes other than that for which it is registered. What is that other than that purpose? Washington Post conducted an investigation. June 2023 published a report and basically said that the central government is taking action against Center for Policy and Research. Why? Because Center for Policy and Research was funding Mr. Alok Shukla. And who is this Mr. Alok Shukla? He is an environmentalist. Who is this Ashok Shukla? He is basically mobilizing the Adivasis. Where? In Chhattisgarh. Why? Because in Chhattisgarh, there is going to be a coal mine of Mr. Gautam Adani. And Mr. Alok Shukla is basically mobilizing the tribals to carry out protests against this coal mine. And in this particular area, the Gond tribes are predominant population. Since Center for Policy and Research is funding Alok Shukla, that is why action is taken by the central government against Center for Policy and Research, according to Washington Post. Center for Policy and Research denies this, saying we have not funded or provided monetary support to Alok Shukla. Whether that is correct or incorrect, this Hindu newspaper article, editorial today, it says that this is something which is very scary and ultimately affects India's standing as a democratic country. Multiple reports have been published in the recent past accusing the government of India that you are penalizing those you do not agree with. And if you don't agree with Center for Policy and Research, you are basically curbing, choking the funding to this organization, which basically is not a democratic thing to do, according to the Hindu. The use of FCRA to target civil society for political or ideological reasons is perhaps the reason why such actions are taken by the government. So this editorial is basically criticizing the central government for cancelling the FCRA license of Center for Policy and Research. What is FCRA? Why was it enacted? What were the significant amendments made in the year 2020? What is the case against Center for Policy and Research? That becomes important for the civil services examination. Clear? Done? Let's look at another important editorial. Asia Ascendant. What has happened? SLIM. What is SLIM? Smart Lander for Investigating Moon. There's a lander, Smart Lander for Investigating Moon. Of which agency? Japanese or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. What this SLIM has done, it has basically landed on moon. When? January 19. Although it was not without any hiccups, it was not too soft a landing. Although this SLIM, which is Smart Lander for Investigating Moon, although it made a soft landing on the moon, on the surface of the moon, but according to various newspaper reports, the solar panels of this satellite, of this device, they did not function, which basically means that now this entity will have to rely on batteries, its own batteries, to provide the information that we require from this smart lander. Which makes Japan only 5th country to land on moon. Which are the other countries? For example, Soviet Union. The year was 1959. Luna 2. It was the first spacecraft to make a successful landing on the surface of the moon. But there were no astronauts present in Luna 2. The first crewed mission to land on moon was in 1969 when Apollo 11 of the United States of America made a successful soft landing on moon. Neil Armstrong became the first astronaut to come out on the surface of the moon. But almost all these landings have been on the near side of the moon and not on the rear side of the moon, or what we call as the far side of the moon. What is this near side of the moon? This is the side of the moon which is visible to us from, which is visible to Earth, which is visible to us from Earth. And why is it possible? This is the only side which is visible to us on Earth at all times. And how is this possible? This is possible because of a concept known as tidal locking. What is this tidal locking? For example, the moon orbits around its axis, rotates around its axis at the same rate as it orbits around the Earth. That means the same rate at which this moon rotates about its axis. It's the same rate at which this moon orbits around the Earth, which means only one side of this moon is visible to us from the Earth. That is what we call the near side of the moon. But then there is the far side of the moon, which is not visible to us from Earth. And it is this far side of the moon where you will see craters. irregular craters, massive craters. The surface is irregular. Lots of bumps, which basically makes landing difficult. That is why space agencies, they prefer landing on the near side of the moon, not on the far side of the moon. In fact, Chandrayaan-3, what is the name of the lander of Chandrayaan-3? Vikram. Landed on the near side of the moon. So Japan, United States, Soviet Russia, India, they have landed on the near side of the moon. The only country which has landed on the far side of the moon is China. Chang'e 4. The year was 2019 when Chang'e 4 landed on the rear side of the moon or the far side of the moon. But China recently, India recently, Japan now, Soviet Union, United States landed much far time in the past. So this speaks about space race where Asia is in the lead, where Japan, India, China, that means of 5 countries, 3 out of 5 countries which have successfully landed on moon, 3 are the Asians. So this speaks about the Asian ascendancy when it comes to the space race. That is what this editorial is all about. Let's look at something else. Better use of technology needs free access. Very important column written by Madhav Chavan. Madhav Chavan is the co-founder of a civil society organization, Pratham. And it is this Pratham we have discussed 2 times in the recent past. It releases a survey known as ASR, Annual Status on Education Report, which is basically a household survey, or should we say an annual household survey that captures children's enrollment and the status of their learning outcomes. Recently, the ASR study was released by Pratham, a civil society organization, where it captured data of children in the age group of 14 to 18 years. I'll briefly summarize it again. What ASR study did, it spoke of something important. It said there is a transition from elementary school to secondary education. More and more students, they are making a successful transition from elementary education to secondary education. That means they are making a transition from qualifying 8th standard examination and moving on to secondary education, which means 9th and 10th. Because there was an apprehension. The apprehension was that COVID-19 pandemic and the economic distress caused by the COVID-19 pandemic will force students to come out of the school. The dropout rates would increase. But this apprehension has now been belied by this ASR report, which says that today children have more years of schooling than they ever had. And now there is a successful transition of students from elementary to secondary education. But then there are some concerns as well. Concerns such as 1/4 of these individuals, of these students, they cannot read, they cannot comprehend the text of standard 2 in their local languages. That means these children in the age group of 14 to 18, they cannot comprehend the text of standard 2 in local language, which means they lack comprehension skills. 1/4 of them. And more than half, they lack mathematical skills or arithmetic skills. Those arithmetic skills which these kids should have been proficient in by standard 3 or 4 or maximum 5. Division, for example, division of 3 letters by 1. They should have been proficient in this by standard 3 or 4 or maximum 5, but they are unable to do that. More than half of these children are unable to do that. That is the sad story which is reflected, which is captured by the ASAR study. And this report released by Pratham, it basically talks about using technology, saying 92% of children who were surveyed, they have smartphones at home. More than 92% of these kids who were surveyed, they said that we have smartphones at home. If you have smartphones, but unfortunately these kids use smartphones for entertainment rather than education. If we have to enhance the learning outcomes of the students, what we need to ensure? We need to ensure that the students have the flexibility in terms of the time, in terms of the schedule. They should be able to access education at any point in time. Because this survey said that students are also under emotional stress. They are under trauma because they have to follow the homework prescribed in the schools as well, and they have to work in the farms as well. So they are under a lot of stress. How can we ensure the learning outcomes for the students? By giving them flexibility. No matter when you want to study, study at that time, but please study. Flexibility in time, flexibility in schedule. Whether you want to attend in the school in person or you want to attend the class on your smartphone, do whatever you want to do, but please study, please understand, comprehend. So we need the use of smartphones. And 92% of these children said we have smartphones at home. But if they have smartphones at home, who is the owner of these smartphones? And I'll tell you why this is important. Of all the surveyed people, they said close to 40% boys or 44% boys said we are the owners of the smartphone. We own the smartphone. 20% girls said we are the owners of the smartphone. That means 80% of the girls, they do not own the smartphone. Close to 56% of the boys, they do not own the smartphone. Then what difference does it make? According to this survey, according to Mr. Madhav Chavan, the co-founder of Pratham, what he says is that when this survey was conducted, now listen to me carefully, when this survey was conducted, these kids, whether boys or girls, doesn't matter, whether they are using someone else's smartphone or they are using their own smartphone, which means they are the owners of these smartphones. Doesn't matter, they can browse content. They know, they understand how to browse content on the internet. For example, they can browse YouTube videos. So whether you are the owner of the smartphone or you are using someone else's smartphone, doesn't matter, you can browse content. You can browse YouTube videos as well. But only those who are the owners, listen to me carefully, only those who are the owners of these smartphones, they know about the safety features. Because you have to save these children from online harassment as well. You have to save these children from online child pornography as well. How do we keep these children safe? If you are the owner of these smartphones, You know how to keep yourself safe by changing password, blocking a contact. Because all these surveyed students, just before the survey, they agreed that we are using social media as well on our smartphones or on someone else's smartphones. But only those who are the owners of these smartphones, they know how to keep themselves safe, how to change the password of their social media profile, how to block a bully, how to block a contact. Mr. Madhav Chavan writes that in 2017, there was a survey conducted by Pratham. And in this survey, they wanted to give smartphones or tablets to the children. But who had the responsibility to ensure the safety of this tab? The mothers. Mothers were told, even if this tablet is lost or even if it stops functioning, don't worry, we will not take money from you, but you have to ensure that this device is under your control. That means who has the control? Mother, not the children. And all these tablets, they were provided with password as well. They were password protected as well. But over a period of time, Pratham realized that majority of these children, they have changed the password of these tablets. Somehow they got to know how to change the password. Somebody might have been aware of how to change the password. And these children, they taught other children how to change the password. So how can you learn a technology? By getting the ownership. Unless and until the children are allowed to play with the technology, to learn on their own, they will not be able to reap the benefits of the technology. Later, Pratham said, we started giving ownership of these tablets to children themselves. And now children would learn on their own and they would teach other children as well. Pratham staff would not interfere, but would just monitor how children are helping other children in learning this technology. What happened in Uttar Pradesh? Cycles were given to girl students. What was the incentive? You move up the school ladder, which basically means you enroll for secondary education or higher secondary education or college education, we will give you a cycle. Mr. Madhav Chavan says, what cycle did to enhancing the enrollment of girl child in education, that smartphones will also do. We need to provide smartphone, ownership of smartphones to these children so that they can learn technology on their own. And through the learning of the technology, they will be able to enhance their learning outcomes. That is the crux of this column written by Mr. Madhav Chavan. Clear? Let's look at something else. The growth of India-Bangladesh ties. We have discussed this once previously, but there are some points which are mentioned, different points mentioned, and I'll just reiterate those points. I'll also briefly summarize what this topic is all about in case you have just joined me. India and Bangladesh, they share border with each other, more than 4,000 kilometer border. And they also share deep historical, cultural, and economic ties as well. Recently, elections were held in Bangladesh. These elections were boycotted by the principal opposition party in Bangladesh, led by Begum Khalida Zia. She is in jail on various corruption charges. Her political party, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, boycotted these elections, saying these elections were not free and fair. Basically, Begum Khalida Zia wanted that these elections should be conducted under the supervision of a caretaker government. That means if Sheikh Hasina was the Prime Minister, she should step down. Someone else should be appointed as a caretaker Prime Minister. And under the guidance and control of this caretaker Prime Minister, caretaker government, election should be conducted in Bangladesh. Only then would this election be free and fair. There used to be a constitutional provision in Bangladesh that the election should be conducted by and carried out by a caretaker government. But the year was 2009 when Sheikh Hasina of Awami League became the Prime Minister. And since then, she has won every election. This is her fourth straight term. Previously, she was the Prime Minister in 1996. Now, when she became the Prime Minister in 2009, till date, she has won 4 consecutive elections. And when she won the election in 2009, in 2011, Constitution was amended saying there is no need to carry elections, to conduct elections under the guidance, under the supervision of a caretaker government. But be that as it may, India was one of the first countries to congratulate Sheikh Hasina on becoming the Prime Minister for the 4th straight term. Russia also congratulated, China also congratulated, although European countries such as United States, they have raised concerns saying that democratic values have been eroded in Bangladesh. They are citing reports where opposition members have been arrested and prevented from contesting elections. They are calling for investigation into various human rights violations which have taken place allegedly under the Prime Ministership of Ms. Sheikh Hasina. But be that as it may, why is this important election for India? Because previously, when 1971 war took place between India and Pakistan, it is this 1971 war which led to the emergence of Bangladesh as an independent entity. If you would recall, Srimati Indira Gandhi, she was called Gungi Gudiya by Mr. Morarji Desai, saying, how can this Gungi Gudiya become the Prime Minister? She doesn't know how to speak. How can she lead this country? I am the Prime Ministerial aspirant. And then this Gungi Gudiya became Durga in 1971. When she fought a war against Pakistan, decisively defeated Pakistan and led to the emergence of Bangladesh as an independent country. It was a watershed movement. And later on, Srimati Indira Gandhi preponed the elections and won by an even thumping majority. But that's not the point. The point is that India helped the creation of Bangladesh as an independent country. But very soon, the relationship deteriorated between India and Bangladesh. Why? Border disputes. This is our part of the land, this is your part of the land. No clarity on the border. That was the problem. Water sharing. Was another problem, which is mentioned here, the Teesta river water dispute between India and Bangladesh, which, by the way, central government as well as the Bangladeshi government, they are on the same page. They want to solve it. But there is one state government which is objecting, which is led by Mamta Didi in West Bengal. Because this Teesta river, which originates from the Himalayas, then makes its way through Sikkim and then West Bengal and then enters into Bangladesh. Bangladesh wanted to construct a barrage for irrigation purposes, basically wanted more share of this river water than they have currently. But one state government is objecting to that, that's West Bengal. The year was 2015, when 100th Constitutional Amendment Act was passed and the India-Bangladesh land boundary agreement was sealed. Some enclaves were given by India to Bangladesh. Some enclaves were given by Bangladesh to India. So India-Bangladesh land boundary agreement was solved in 2015 under the Prime Ministership of Sheikh Hasina. So right after 1971, Bangladesh emerged as an independent entity, but the relationship quickly deteriorated for at least next couple of decades because of the border disputes, because of water sharing, and also because in Bangladesh, there was a dominance of Jamaat-e-Islami. And this Jamaat-e-Islami holds allegiance to Pakistani Jamaat-e-Islami. And they were responsible for heinous war crimes during the 1971 war. Operation Searchlight, which was launched by Pakistani Army on 25th March 1971, which led to the massacre of thousands of people in Bangladesh. This massacre was perpetuated by the activists of Jamaat-e-Islami as well. So Jamaat-Islami Bangladesh, Jamaat-Islami Pakistan, closer to each other, and it led to tensions between India and Bangladesh. The real good relationship started with Sheikh Hasina becoming the Prime Minister, particularly in 2009 onwards. And now we have glorious economic ties with each other. But if the ties are very good with each other, there is one dragon which is looking at it, and that is China. If we look at India-Bangladesh relationship and Bangladesh and China relationship, bilateral trade between India and Bangladesh has crossed 15 billion in 2021-22. Although the Hindu newspaper report today says that this number is 18 billion, but there are other publications which are saying 15 billion. But be that as it may, it is in this range. But the bilateral trade between Bangladesh and China in the same period has crossed 25 billion dollars. Not just this, China has invested $10 billion in Belt and Road initiatives in Bangladesh. India has provided $500 million of credit to Bangladesh for defense imports. And Bangladesh is the second largest importer of Chinese arms. Bangladesh imports electricity from India. Up to 1160 megawatt electricity is imported by Bangladesh from India. And on the other side, $450 million support is provided by Bangladesh to China to ramp up its own domestic power generation. So there is a strong rivalry, competition between India and China as to who will have better ties with Bangladesh. Bangladesh is constructing something known as, there is one important port which is being constructed by Bangladesh. It's mentioned somewhere, I forgot where it is mentioned, I'm unable to locate it. Which is close to 100 kilometers from Tripura. And it is this port which will provide access between Dhaka and Northeast India. And India will have to lay its strong claim to talk about this port. Matarbari Port. Matarbari Port located 100 kilometers near Tripura. And this is the port which would connect Dhaka with Northeast India. So India will have to have a keen eye on the development of this port. How this port would be shaped up, how the Teesta River Water Agreement will shape up. For that, we will have to include West Bengal into the talks as well. And China and Bangladesh should be aware that more Chinese investment may take Bangladesh away from India. And the Bangladeshi Prime Minister has said that she is very much careful about Bangladesh's partnership with China. So India-Bangladesh relationship is very important for GS Paper 2 International Relations. Please keep a track of these developments. Next, let's look at the last article that we have to discuss today. With just 2 speakers, a language in Kerala with no script is on the brink of extinction. This language, Madhika, it has no script. There are only 2 speakers who are fluent in this language. If they die, and when they die, this language would become extinct. What do we need to understand from this column? We need to understand that there is something known as endangered language. What is an endangered language? The definition is provided by UNESCO. A language which is spoken by less than 10,000 people. That language is known as an endangered language. After the census of 1971, the central government had indicated that we may no longer give official language status to a language which is spoken by less than 10,000 people, what we call the endangered language. So what is an endangered language becomes important, the definition becomes important. And at the same time in Mysore, we have an institute known as Central Institute of Indian Languages. Central Institute of Indian Languages, whose task is to document, promote, preserve all these endangered languages in India. Because according to various reports, every year there are languages which are becoming extinct or endangered in India, and we need to preserve all these languages. Let's look at two mains-based questions for your practice today. Question number 1, while access to a common smartphone can be described as basic or superficial, owning a smart device is necessary for deeper access to information and services. Comment. Linking it with the ASER study report. It is time to repeal the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act and revive the idea of an autonomous, self-regulatory agency for civil society organizations. Critically analyze. How do we regulate the functioning, the funding of civil society organizations? For that, do we need FCRA or we need a separate autonomous agency to monitor their funding? Because FCRA has come under a lot of criticism. Basically, the government is accused of targeting those entities which are not publishing favorable news for them. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. See you again tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning, with another edition of the Hindu newspaper. And if you have liked this session, do not forget to press the like button. Drop in your comments after the session is over. I will be eagerly waiting to go through your comments. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, and share the links of these sessions with your friends and fellow aspirants. Stay safe. See you tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.